All right, welcome to our class on objection. You may have had this experience already or seen it happen, but there's somebody that's got a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and they're friends or somebody that wants to tells them what a bad deal they have and you should leave him, her. They're not good for you. Oh, I don't like this about them. They're really awful, and stuff like that. And, sometimes it's friends being, well-meaning and all that stuff. And other times somebody's interested for some other reason. And there's stuff in movies and stuff like this. I actually knew somebody that did this who convinced a woman that her marriage was no good and then ran off with her. And the woman left her husband and that was it. So, these things happen. Why do I bring this up? Because you're making your confirmation. You've committed yourself to living the life of a Christian, a Catholic, following Christ. And there are people that will work very hard to convince you that it's a dumb idea. And it's really important. And some of those people will be people in authority. In my case, I actually had a grandfather that when I became Catholic, he was not like some of the grandfathers you tell me about, which are wonderful. My grandfather was very much not happy with me becoming Catholic. The other thing is that there are people that are in other positions of authority. If you go to a university, go to college, you'll have professors that will tell you that it's a dumb thing. And they'll give you all kinds of reasons, and I'm going to go over some of those today. So the idea is, I thought it'd be interesting for you to hear the objections to being Catholic that people have. And then we can, I'll to give you some thoughts on it. This is not so that you repeat what I tell you. It's for you to think about what you think of it. And, if you listen to some of these, the risk is that you listen to one of these objections I give you and you go, oh, actually, that's right. I guess I don't want to be Catholic. So that's the risk that we take. There's free will, remember? But I'll give you some thoughts on each one. And it could come in handy. If nothing else, it kind of gets you thinking about it. If you've had the experience of somebody telling you that making your confirmation is dumb, being Catholic is dumb, you should go do this other thing, you should do nothing, share that maybe in your response. That'd be a great thing to share. And how you dealt with it, what it was like, see if it was anything in here. And if not, definitely, if you have an objection you've heard before that's not in these, because these are not going to be all of them, do feel free to share that as well. Or you could just share whatever your favorite one was or the most interesting or something new. I don't know, but share anything you like. But do share something and do talk longer than 10 seconds, okay? Because some folks are just like, yeah, I remember this part. And then it's done. So, go a little longer. You've got 10 minutes and I will listen to everything you have to say. All right. So let's start, and this is in no particular order. One of the things you'll hear is Christians are stupid. Catholics are stupid. I just saw this on something recently, again. And I actually had somebody when I was going to Long Beach City College, when I was, how old was I? Like 25, 26, 27 maybe. I went back to college at night. So I'd go to work during the day and then at night I'd go and take a class or two then. And I had somebody that actually told me when they found out I was Catholic, she said, wow, you seem really, really smart. I'm kind of surprised that a Catholic would be that smart. So, okay. Thank you, I think, I don't know. Whatever. So, not so much of a response, but something to think about on that is that in the first place, we talked about some of these folks. You could look this up. You could look up Alcuin of York in the year 800 when Charlemagne decided that he wanted everybody in his new empire to be well educated. That was the person he brought from England to go and basically oversee the education of an empire. It's a pretty big deal. He was pretty amazing. Some of our subjects and everything, the basic subjects that you study today, in part were arranged and kind of named by Alcuin of York. St. Augustine that we covered was one of the, many people would say was the greatest mind of the Middle Ages, or the late Empire. I don't know. Thomas Aquinas is another one that's known for his intellect. Doesn't mean they're always right, but these are brilliant people. And I'm also going to show you this list of famous scientists that were priests, monks. When you study, for instance, on that list, you'll see, when you study genetics, you'll learn about Mendelian genetics. That's after Gregor Mendel, who was a monk, was a Catholic monk. Just the fact that there's all these brilliant people doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it kind of denies the idea that there's something stupid about it because these people are brilliant. And there's an awful lot of them. Bear in mind, not necessarily Catholic, but there's a lot of people that were very, very famous, who were completely Christian and took it very seriously, like Sir Isaac Newton, that you've, I hope, learned about in science class. And if you haven't, look him up. And then the other thing is many others. My childhood hero in science, when I was like 5 or 6, 7 years old, and I was just learning what science was George Washington Carver. And he kept a Bible in his laboratory. So, go figure. Okay, so all that. The other thing, though, to remember is that when somebody says that something's stupid, it usually just means they don't like it and they don't necessarily have a reason. So they're just going to insult. In logic, that's called an ad hominem attack. It means you're attacking the person and not really attacking the ideas. So you can always ask, well, what do you think in particular is stupid? Do you think the idea of God is stupid? Do you think that God is reasonable, but you think it's done wrong? You think what religion do you think is not stupid? That kind of stuff. And this is one of the big things you should learn is ask questions. That I will recommend, ask questions. It's always better to ask questions back and understand where they're really coming from, what they're really thinking. And a lot of the time you find out they really don't know. They're just repeating what somebody else told them. And this is a huge problem. And as Catholics, we don't want to do that. We don't want to just repeat what we've heard. That's why I encourage you to listen to this and then form your own approach to life. Let's see. The other thing they'll say that's similar is it's ridiculous. The idea that there's this flying spaghetti monster God, that's one of the things they do. It's just ridiculous. It's stupid to think that a God actually created all this. And, you have to find your own response to that. But the point here again is they're just saying it's ridiculous. It's an opinion, but it's not giving reasons. Saying that something is ridiculous is not a reason. That doesn't prove anything. There's gravity. Oh, that's ridiculous. Well, that doesn't make any sense. But you can look at it as, does it look ridiculous to you? Why not? Hopefully at this point, you've really thought about the faith a little bit, and it's not just something you're doing because of, your parents or relatives, but you're starting to see that there's something here. You should know the terms. Flippancy. No one's going to say this, by the way. I just like you to know them. Flippancy is when you consider something a joke, but you don't really ever think about it. You just say, oh, that's just stupid. That's just, ridiculous. But you don't have a reason why. And you act as though everybody else will agree and everybody knows this, even though in fact, no, everybody doesn't know this and everybody doesn't necessarily agree. But it's making it seem like if you don't think it's ridiculous, there's something wrong with you because everybody else, and I've heard people say this, everybody else knows but you. Well, no, that doesn't make any sense. There's a whole church, there's 1 billion Catholics in the world. So clearly this isn't something that, that I'm the only one. Glibness. Being glib is just saying a thing that just kind of, it's like a good thing to say, it sounds good, but there's nothing behind it. It's often said and they just expect you're just going to go, oh, I guess you're right. So there's a little vocab for you. Look up glib or glibness and flippancy. Okay, another thing you'll hear is Christians do evil things. That's completely true. Is that a reason not to believe it? Because the fact is, in every belief, in any belief you want to pick, somebody that believes it does wrong things. Everything. It's people do evil things. And sometimes they believe this, sometimes they believe that. But that's an even thing all the way across. There's bad people in everything. And we certainly would never say that just because you're Catholic means you're a good person, because that's not the case. If you're really following it, you'll do pretty well. But even then we can do wrong things. Some people will point out that the Christians, the Catholics, were the first ones to invent hospitals in the way that we have them now. The idea of caring for the sick and not just letting them die was not something the ancient civilizations really did very well. They couldn't deal with that. They were desperate for resources and they didn't have the medicines and all that. But once Christianity started, you'll notice that things changed in the world very rapidly, and they'll act like that isn't because of Christianity, but it is. Jesus started this thing off, and a lot of the stuff that you enjoy now comes from it, because the world became different once the large part of the world became Christian. It caused people to think in a different way, and they were able to organize things better. They were able to do that, and they had the reason to care for the poor and reason to care for the sick. In medieval times, the Middle Ages, which people like to make fun of, especially when they're making fun of Christianity or the church, but in medieval times was the first time that there were whole organizations devoted to serving the poor and the sick. And that's not a thing that really existed anyplace else in the world quite the same way. In ancient Rome, 2,000 years ago, they would give out grain and food to the poor, but that was just to keep them under control, because there were a lot of poor people in Rome, and they would do that, and they would have the circuses, they would have the gladiator fights and chariot races and stuff. They were there just to give some people things to do, because if people don't have something to do, they start to cause trouble. Very, very different reasoning. But for Catholics, to care for the poor is an extremely important thing for us. That comes right from Jesus. Another thing you'll hear is they will criticize your faith for a lot of things that you don't actually believe. Especially out in Europe, the people that I listen to from Europe almost always will portray the church as being like what's called evangelical Christianity in the United States. And this is something that we talked about a little bit before, that is only maybe about 100 or a little more than 100 years old in the United States. It started here. And it's a totally different set of beliefs than what we believe. Certainly they don't believe in the sacraments and everything else that we do. But the other thing is they are very strong on the idea that the world was created in 6 days. The Genesis should be taken literally. That's not the position of the Catholic Church. And so when somebody tells you, oh, well, Christians are stupid because, they have these weird ideas, you don't believe in evolution. Well, in the first place, evolution is a scientific theory, and it's not a matter of faith. There is evidence that supports the idea of evolution. There's also evidence that says that maybe that's not accurate. And as a scientist, you look at everything. But when they do that, always get them down to specifics. Well, what do you object to? Well, Catholics don't believe in evolution. Well, that's actually not true. We don't believe one way or the other on it. That's a science thing. You believe that God created the earth in 6 days. We really don't know. Genesis is there to tell us about our relationship with God. It wasn't meant as a book of science. I mean, there's good answers to this, but the main thing is you'll find that the things that they will accuse you of believing, you actually don't believe. Now, one thing that was interesting is one of my sons tended not to read. He just had a hard time in high school that way. And when he spent time at one of his jobs and, on breaks and in between and stuff, this one person that worked with him would go down these things, and tell him the reasons why his faith was dumb. And it caused him to actually start to read. He went back and actually started reading about the faith so that he would have a better understanding, so that he could respond and have a discussion. And I think that's interesting. So you may find something like that, but be open to learning more to answer the questions in your own way. You got to be yourself, and only you can talk about your faith, well, period. Because I can't talk to somebody about what your faith is. Even though we believe so much the same, and we believe what the church holds and teaches, each of us gets it in our own way. Each of us is unique. That's a really important thing. Somebody will tell you it's not progressive. It's not the way the world needs to move forward. It's holding us back in medieval times. Oh, you mean the times when we invented hospitals and started actually caring for the poor and tried to figure out how to move everybody up? In case you didn't know, the poverty rate has been going down for a very long time. If you listen to some people now, they'll tell you that poverty is increasing and things are just worse every year. But all you have to do is look online and look at a graph of the poverty rate, and you'll see it going down. So just letting you know. Let's see. They'll also say it's conservative. You know, the Catholic Church is racist. It's, doesn't want rights for women, doesn't want to let people do things they want to do. And the Catholic Church is neither conservative nor liberal. We follow the gospel, and sometimes we agree with one group, and sometimes we agree with another group, or rather they agree with us. But really, the idea of conservative means that you want to keep everything the same. Do we want to keep everything like it is right now? No, there's things that need to be fixed, but there are some things that are good. We want to hold on to those. So we want both change, and we also want to hold on to what's good. That's being Catholic. We don't really fit in any of the political groups. One that you'll hear is, well, that just can't be true. God can't exist. That just doesn't make any sense. There's no evidence of God. So the fact that you're listening to this right now is a little bit evidence of God. Some of you have had really good experiences that you've told me about where either you had experiences of prayer, you had experiences of God in some other way, you had an experience that made you want to change your life and change who your friends are. I hear that a lot from you. You want to make a change in your life. You want to live better. That's evidence of God. But when they say this stuff, get them to specifics. If there's one thing you want to do to defend the faith is get people to give you specifics, because otherwise they'll just keep it vague. And you can't deal with that. They're just making stuff up, but never naming it, never actually telling you any real statements. You can't really have a discussion with somebody if they're not going to actually say something. So saying, oh, it can't be true is really not an argument, and it's really not very smart. You'll hear some people say, well, Jesus was just somebody that you made up, and he never really existed. But actual historians have gone so far as to use the writings in the Bible and their knowledge of Roman history. The Romans documented things quite a bit. There's one historian, Colin Humphreys of Cambridge University in England, who actually set a date of the crucifixion based on all these different facts and writings and stuff. Now, there's one side one on this I think is kind of interesting, is people have said, if Jesus was, who you say he is, why didn't the Romans document that they killed the Son of God? Why didn't the Romans have a record someplace of killing Jesus? And it's like, in the first place, they had no idea. They certainly didn't believe that's who he was. And they were killing thousands of people. The number of people crucified by the Romans is undoubtedly in the thousands. There was a slave revolt led by a Thracian slave named Spartacus that you may have heard of, and they made a movie about it back in the 60s. And in Spartacus, when he lost, he did a slave uprising. When he lost, the Romans crucified him and crucified his followers. I forget how many, but it was a lot. I want to say it was thousands. And actually crucified them along the road leading from Rome to the ocean. I mean, just a picture, thousands of people on crosses next to the road dying for miles and miles and miles and miles. So they crucified a lot of people, and they weren't keeping track of anybody. So that's just the way it is. Another objection is that we have backward ideas on gay people, abortion, marriage, all kinds of stuff. And just, have them defend. They're the one that gets to defend. Let them explain to you why it should be okay. And hopefully I've given you some ideas earlier in this class that may help you with that. But look at the church's teachings and look at what the church says about it and why. Now, bear in mind also that they'll often accuse us of hating people that live differently. But we love everybody. We're supposed to love everybody. If you haven't heard this before, we have no excuse to treat anybody unkindly. We have to be firm. If somebody's going to do something, obviously somebody's going to kill somebody, you can't just let them go do it. But for the most part, people have free will. Not for the most part, they have free will. We want to call them to something better, but we don't necessarily do that through law. We certainly don't do it through force. We have to find some way to live that we give people room to even do the wrong thing sometimes, but at the same time that we call them to the good. And right now, this is really a struggle because people are trying to silence us and say, well, you can't call people to the good, what you think is good, because you're bad. But we should have free speech. But at the same time, if somebody really wants to live, if somebody wants to not be married and they just want to live with their girlfriend and act like they're married, and sleep with 10 people, I don't know. There's not a lot we can do about that. Not a lot we necessarily should do about it. But if you get in a discussion, you can have a calm, reasonable discussion about it. Say, here's why the church teaches what it does. Here's why it's a man and a woman, get married. They have children. It's there as a kind of representation of God in the Trinity. It's God's way of giving us a chance to help others, that we serve the child and raise the child up. There's stuff that we've talked about. These are all good things, but you got to get them to where they're actually in a conversation and not just saying you're stupid or this is bad. What's funny about it is they'll say that we shouldn't tell anybody that something's bad, but it's okay for them to tell us that we're bad. They're not consistent. Point out the inconsistency. They'll say, this is your personal belief. It's just you, but it isn't true for anybody else. But if God exists, then that's just a fact. If he exists, that's just a fact. It isn't something where I can say, well, I believe God exists, so he exists for me, but not for you. And you can point out a chair or a table in the room and say, this exists for me. Does that not exist for you? And they go, oh, well, that's not a table to me. I'm going to call that an elephant. Well, then they can be silly. People do this stuff. You'll see it. There's an old thing that people used to tell young people just to annoy them. And they'd say, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Oh my goodness, I hated this when I was a kid. And they're just trying to mess with your mind. Now, there's actually there's a philosopher that thought of this kind of stuff way back. But it's kind of silly. Sometimes in those things, you just have to ask, what does it mean to you to make a sound? And if they say, well, it means I can hear something. Well, then that's not my idea of making a sound. My idea of making a sound is that there's, pressure waves in air. And when those move along and strike the eardrum, yes. But if they don't hit an eardrum, there's still waves there. That sound still exists. But anyway, there are some things that are personal beliefs that are outside what the church teaches. And you're free to have those. You're free to disagree with the church's teachings if you want. But the idea that something is true for one person but is not true for another, that the sun is there for one person but the sun doesn't exist for the other, that's just silly. There are some things that have to be outside of our own head. Why should most of the world be wrong except you? In other words, you believe that you know the way, that Jesus is the way. You believe that you're going to live your life this way and that you understand things well enough to do this. But that's just you. You think you've got it and everybody else is wrong? Does that seem reasonable? Well, of course it doesn't seem really reasonable, but you're not the only one. And that's a good defense on that one is, well, I'm certainly not the only one that believes this. There's a billion people in the world. Eureka! And of course, if they're saying that it's just, why should you be right and that there's no God, then they're saying, basically what they're saying is the opposite thing. They're saying that, the 99% of the people in the world that believe in some spiritual thing, not necessarily God as we think of God, but that believe there's more to life than just matter, just stuff that you can, touch. It's most of the people in the world. So really, they're the one that says that they're right and everybody else is wrong. So you can turn that around. That could be interesting. And it's not just you. It's not just now. This has been going on for a long time. So to say that it's just you, that doesn't really cut it. They'll say that truth is personal or relative, that there's no right and wrong, all that kind of stuff. In those cases, a lot of the time, you just have to go back to basics. And, do you believe in free will? People that don't believe in free will believe that there's no right or wrong because nobody has a choice. So if somebody believes that way, there's not a lot you can really do. We talked a little bit about it in determinism. You can look at some of the other videos I did on determinism or free will. Compatibilism and free will is a good video. But the idea is that if they believe in determinism, if they believe they don't have a choice, then that also completely eliminates the possibility of love. Love isn't possible without free will. Love is a decision. It's a choice we make. So if somebody believes they have no choices, so there's no right and wrong, and if they have like a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something, or husband or wife, you can go, well, do you think you love them? And they go, yeah. Well, you don't have a choice. So you just go to your boyfriend, go to your girlfriend and say, oh yeah, actually I love you because the universe has brought me to this point and I really have no choice in the matter. All the molecules and everything else moving along makes it so that I have to do this. But really, I don't have any choice in it. I did not choose you. The universe just ordered me to do this and I can't help it. And yeah, that won't go over. They'll be alone very soon. Some people say everything can be true. I worked with a guy who was from London, and he was an interesting guy, marketing guy. And he told me, he says, I believe in all the gods. I believe in all the religions, and I just figure that one of them might be right, and then I'll be okay when I die. Well, I don't think it quite works that way. But of course, if everything is true, then nothing is true. It's like if one religion says there's two gods and we say there's one, they can't both be true. Oh, sure they can be true. No, they really can't. So you got to be able to hold that line. And when they just are silly, you got to be able to call it out and say, I can't have two eggs and say it's one egg. And it's the same thing. You say it's one egg, I say it's two eggs, but they're both true. No, they're not both true. That doesn't make any sense. You point it out with objects. A lot of the time, just go to eggs and rocks and stuff and illustrate things for them. I don't know. You got to spell it out. This one you'll hear quite a bit. I could never believe in a God who would condemn people to hell. You might even think about this one and think, wow, yeah, that's really bad. Why would God do that? Why would God be so mean as to put people into hell? And one response that I've heard is, God was kind enough to some people that he created hell so they'd have a place to go. And that sounds funny maybe, but think about it. So we have free will. So if everybody went to heaven and there's people that you'll meet that hate the idea of God, and if they found out that God existed and they had to spend eternity with God in heaven, that would be horrible for them. In fact, that would be hell. Right? If you think about somebody you can't stand, I hope you don't have anybody you can't stand. But let's just say there's somebody and they drive you crazy and you just don't want to be around them. And then something happens and they say, oh, you're just so lucky you get to spend the rest of your life or the rest of eternity with them. How would you feel? Wouldn't that be horrible? So for the people that don't want to be with God, um, if God took them to heaven, it would be hell for them anyway. And we don't really know what exactly it means to be in heaven or hell. What we know is that hell, they get to be away from God, which is what they wanted. If that's what somebody wants in their whole life, then when they die, they get what they wanted. And this is the key thing here that you can tell people, and you should think about this. In the end, we all get what we want. If what we want most is to be with God and to be with all of his people, then that's what we get. If what we want most is to make a lot of money, abuse people, get rich, powerful, do whatever we want, then that's what we get. But when the world is gone, when we die and all the flesh is gone, there's no more Maserati, there's no more Lamborghini, there's no more fancy food, there's no more fancy clothes. We're only left with ourselves at that point. And to be alone and to have all those possessions leave us, to have no power, it would be hell for somebody. But that's what they wanted. So we give them the chance now, we talk to them and we remind them, this isn't all there is. There's a whole nother world. So something to think about. But that one's really, really important to understand, that it isn't that God created hell and punishes people. Basically, people get what they want. And one of the silly things that'll happen is that people say, well, oh, great, that means I can do all this wrong stuff, but I really want to be with God, so I'll still go to heaven. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. People fool themselves. And if you've probably seen that in your experience, and some of you may have had a change of your life already where you realized you were fooling yourself about something and then decided to make a change. I think I shared before about how my wife, when she was in her second year of high school, decided that she'd kind of gone the wrong direction and that she'd fooled herself in a way to think those things were important, partying and drinking and stuff like that. And she gave it all up. It was a very powerful thing. Sometimes I'll just pick some other position the church takes. There's an atheist out there right now that's written some books and stuff. I don't think he's that impressive, but his whole thing was the Eucharist is stupid. Now, he doesn't believe in God at all and just spends all of his time making fun of us. But, he was like, oh, they actually believe this thing, and this is the root of all evil. This is horrible that, they believe this. And it's like, well, get him to explain why, if somebody tells you that. Remember, I'm going to say this again, remember that most people that give you these objections, that try to talk you out of the faith, most of the time, they're not really thinking, they're just repeating what they've been told. I hope you don't just repeat what I tell you. I do want you to go and pray and learn, grow closer to God, because you can get all kinds of cool stuff from God. But with me, there's just not that much here. There's not that many classes. And I could probably give you all kinds of stuff, but it's nowhere near what God could give you. I mean, come on. And he can bless you every day of your life for half a century or more. If you're lucky, you might live 100 years. I don't know. So that was Dawkins is the guy's name. This is the last objection, and it's a different kind of one. This one won't be said just like this. There are people that make money by your failure. They make money by convincing you of things that aren't really true. Most businesses are telling you that if you buy their product, you'll be happier. Now, there's some foods that they sell, that are pretty tasty. But it's enjoyable. Is it really going to make you happy because you've got sweet food, or I don't know what else, it's got good spices in it or something? I mean, you're going to enjoy life. You're going to enjoy it. But it's not going to make you happy. I worked in St. Louis, Missouri for about 1.5 years. I was there for 2 winters and it was cold. And I learned to get by in the cold I got a good coat. It was quite an adventure, actually. But when I was there, I had the company I worked for would pay me, and it was a big company that you've heard of. They would give me money $35 for dinner every night. Can you imagine what kind of dinner you can get for $35? I mean, that was back 10 years ago. It was a pretty good deal. And what I would do, this tells you how big of a pig I really am. So I found a steakhouse that was really, really good. It's called Gerard's in St. Louis, and I recommend that place. I hope they're still in business. And the owner of the place was there. He worked. And, we would talk and everything. It was really a great experience. I really liked the place. I liked everything about it. And nice people, everything. And I could have gone there every night and got the biggest filet mignon steak. And what I did sometimes, because this is how big of a pig I am, I actually paid an extra $7. So I paid $7 to get extra meat because I really like steak. And so I would pay $7, but I would get $42 worth of food. And it was delicious. And I could do this every night I was there. So I'd fly in on Sunday nights and I'd fly out on Friday. So, I could have several nights a week that I'd be getting these fantastic dinners. But I didn't do that every night. I might do it twice a week sometimes. But you know what? It was delicious, but having it all the time just wasn't right. It just, I don't know, it would have spoiled it. We just don't need that much stuff. So I would actually go there, maybe Monday night, I would go in there and I'd get my fancy dinner and the whole bit. And man, it was a lot of food. And the next night, I would just go off to fast food and just get a burger. And I do that more nights than I went to Gerard's. Fantastic food. But I just didn't need that. And it just didn't work for me to keep, having all the fancy stuff all the time. Pretty much every religion, not just Christianity, pretty much every religion teaches that happiness is not to be found in possessions. That having more stuff is not the point of life. Christianity in particular, especially the Catholic Church, really strongly teaches care for the poor. And the idea of living simply. Living in voluntary poverty is an option for us. The Franciscans, for instance, are an order that takes vows of poverty. They don't own anything. And I've known lots of people that really try to live simply. And to some degree, we do. Certainly not as simply as we might. We chose to have, children. And so we had to do things to take care of them. But, for me, if I went out and got $1 billion tomorrow, I'm not getting a mansion. I'd probably just get rid of as much of it as I could, as quickly as I could. But, I'm not going to go out and get a fancy car and the whole bit. I've already got a car that works. So this is the faith tends to say, don't spend so much. You don't need to buy a bunch of junk. You don't need the latest of all this. You don't need 100 pairs of shoes. You don't need all these fancy clothes. I mean, I pretty much wear the same clothes pretty much every day. I mean, I've got work shirts like this that I have a nice little number of those, so I'm not wearing the same shirt every day. I've got a few pairs of dress pants that I wear to work, when I went into the office. And, it's not a lot of stuff. The companies would go broke if everybody was like me. We wouldn't be buying enough to make them get rich. And that's the problem, is that in reality, all the companies that are out there, just about all of them would be a lot happier if nobody believed in God. If everybody thought this was all there was and the point of life was to get more toys, more possessions, a nicer phone, a nicer computer, fancier clothes, all that stuff. If that's the way the world worked, these companies would be making even more money. And everybody would ultimately be empty and unhappy. But religions go against that. And especially Catholicism, especially being Catholic. So no wonder they hate us. So if you ever think companies are not against the faith, rethink that. Because when you realize this, you realize we stand between them and higher profits. There's a lot of forces, a lot of people that would like you to lose your faith. And just remember that they're not the ones that have to live your life. They're just trying to get something done for themselves. In the case of companies, they want to, make you have to go to them for happiness and not God. They want to take the place of God in a sense. In the sense of individuals, sometimes they want you to leave the faith so that they can feel right about their own choices. Because as long as you do things the way you're supposed to, as long as you try to live the faith, even without saying anything, you're going to make them uncomfortable. And that's caused some people to leave the faith. But again, it's your life. And if they feel bad about the way you're living, too bad for them. If you don't like the way somebody else is living, too bad for you, because it's just the way life is. Free will. But do think about that and always ask yourself, why is this person doing this? Why is this person so interested in pulling me out of the church? Sometimes they're trying to just get you into their own church. Sometimes they're just trying to get you into their own group of friends, because the more friends they have to go get drunk with and party and do bad things, the more they feel like it's a good thing. The more they feel like, well, if everybody else thinks it's good, then what I'm doing is okay. But if you won't do what they do, it's telling them maybe there's something wrong in their life. And that bothers them, and they want to solve that problem. So these are all things to think about. And I hope, maybe go back if there's something that you want to go back and think about some more. Go back and listen to this again sometime. Remember maybe to subscribe to the channel, because I'll put more of these things on even after the class is over. And it's good for you to continue to grow, and maybe you'll find something useful in here. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this, and we'll talk again soon.
A dragon never yields. Objection! Objection!
Objection!
Objection! Hold it! Objection!
Objection!
Take that! Objection!
Objection!
Objection! Hold it! Objection!
Objection!
Take that! Objection!
Hold it!
Hold it! Objection!
Hold it! Objection!
Objection!
Hold it!
Hold it! Objection!